So good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Mary Evans, the in-residence professor of history at the MTSU University Honors College. Welcome, please, everybody, to the last lecture of the Spring 2024 Honors College Lecture Series on mental health and the good life, strategies for happiness, wholeness, and well-being. Today is Monday, the 22nd of April, and it is officially today Earth Day. We celebrated it on campus this past weekend on Saturday the 20th. I think Nashville celebrated on the 20th as well. But today is actually Earth Day, which is, and since I'm a history professor, please indulge me. I think if I do my arithmetic correctly, 54 years old. It dates back to 1970 to the Richard Nixon administration, which was when I was in college. So, you're welcome. The sun is shining. And so after class, let's all please go outside and pause and stand in the sunshine together for a few minutes. Do a little me time. Thank you to Dr. Dunlap and Dr. Anderson. I have candy. Nancy has candy. Let's enjoy a little bit of that outside. Likely not the good food that Professor Harris had in mind, but she surely does want us to eat and enjoy ourselves. So we thank Professor Harris for keeping us on the right track. Let's hang together for a few minutes afterwards to create community and talk. Whether we're alike or different, let's find ways to connect with each other, as you did the day we went to the square back at the end of February. But thank you to Dr. Stevens and Professor Seiler and Mr. Dobbins for talking about the ways that we can connect over difference. Let's discuss our summer plans and our purposefulness to keep ourselves busy and focused. Keep a bit of tension in our lives and strength in our being for the weeks ahead and through the summer. So thank you, Dr. Marshall and Dr. Evans. And let's say our semester goodbyes to each other. Let's express our gratitude for this beautiful day and for the joy of your sharing your intellect with me this semester, which I genuinely appreciate more than I can possibly express. It is always my honor to teach MTSU honors students and to read your reflections when you really share from the heart and from your own thoughts. It's important to you. So please continue to do that and share with each other through the semester. Thank you, Dr. Jones and Dr. Oliver, for the kind words that set us along that path. And let us be grateful for all of this semester's many, many other blessings and opportunities to think about and grow from and learn from and expand our understanding of ourselves, of our citizenship, of our relationships in our communities and society and the world, and its environment and health all around us, contributing our purpose to this life which girds our mental health and adds meaning to our lives. And one of our many blessings this semester is the privilege of our having Dr. Tom Brinthaupt close out our lecture series today with this last lecture, which he's titled Finding the Good Life Wherever You Are. Dr. Brinthaupt is an esteemed member of our honors faculty corps here at the university. He is actually retiring at the end of this academic year, so this is legitimately his last lecture today, and it is a plenary set of words of wisdom for all of us, for you students and for us faculty alike. Dr. Brinthaupt has been a faculty member at the MTSU Department of Psychology since 1990. So again, if my arithmetic is correct, I'm counting that to be about 33 years with this fine institution. He received his bachelor's degree from State University of New York, Oneonta, SUNY, that's part of the SUNY system. Oneonta is in central New York. It's up there near Syracuse and Albany somewhere. He received his master's degree from St. Bonaventure University, which is in western New York, and his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh. At MTSU, Dr. Brinthaupt has worn many hats. He's directed many programs. He's taught more courses, directed more undergraduate and graduate students and theses, been the principal investigator of more grants, written more books and scholarly articles, served on more editorial boards, overseen more workshops and learning communities, and served on and chaired more committees and senates and associations than we can possibly name here over the course of these 33 some odd years. But one specific one that I will name is that for 13 years, through until just really last December, He was the director of MTSU's Faculty Development for Teaching and Learning, which is housed on the 3rd floor of our Walker Library. It's called LT and ITC, the Learning, Teaching, and Innovative Technology Center. He did that from 2010 to 2023. So really, he has been the director of faculty continuing education here at MTSU for well over a decade. And in addition to all those other pathways and projects that he's been involved in, he's directed that as well and has led us all in trying to improve our teaching capabilities. So much so that in 2022, he was awarded this university's very highest scholarly recognition, the MTSU Career Achievement Award for his lifetime of research and scholarship. Our own Dean Weil has also been awarded that blessed recognition. It is very thin air, rare air of scholarship to achieve that uppermost level. And for their contributions, we all are most grateful for all of the ways in which you have increased human knowledge and our understanding. So we're honored today, especially honored today, to have Dr. Tom Brinthaupt present us with our last lecture, Finding the Good Life Wherever We Are. So please welcome him.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Much of what you said at the beginning of your talk or introduction is stuff I was going to talk about, so you've pretty much taken most of my thunder. So
Not possible.
I'm just going to stand here and kind of twiddle my thumbs. And no, actually, here's my plan for what I'd like to cover in the next 50 minutes or so. I'll also do some review of things that you've heard this semester, really condensed, short form. I'll say a little bit about who I am and like why am I here, and she's said sort of the reason for that, I guess, but I want you to get to know me a little bit better because of the other things that I'll be talking about. I'm going to focus on the role of other people. You'll see. And kind of press this a couple of times. And then I'm going to end with some slides on quote-unquote possible wisdom. What I did, and then I'm hoping that we'll leave some time for some questions and comments. What I tried to do in putting this talk together was listening to most of the talks that you've heard. I've been here for most of those. And I don't know if you noticed me taking notes during these talks, but I've kind of pulled what I thought were significant or important or meaningful things related to the theme of finding the good life. And I hope I recognize where you are now, currently. I was once there some years ago, a few years ago. So in the process of doing that, I realized that there are several different thoughts, philosophies, quotes that have been personally meaningful for me. And what I mean by that is things that I've found myself frequently telling my students or telling my colleagues or telling my friends and family or what have you. So a lot of it's going to be that. So you'll see that I have various quotes in here and then these little tidbits of summary and stuff like that. So as that's the kind of preamble. I hope this will actually be relevant to the theme of finding the good life wherever you are. We'll see. It's okay if it's not. You can critique me if we have time. Okay? All right, so let's get going. And very quickly, here's stuff that I heard throughout the semester from the various speakers, all of which, I'm not just saying this because I'm a professor and most of them were professors too, right? All of them were like really interesting to me. So this series, I don't know if you realize this, but this series is like really good. So props to the organizers and to have this kind of thing and to expose you to this kind of information. So here's some of the things that I heard. Let me back up a second and say I'm in the psychology department and I'm a personality psychologist. So I'm mostly interested in individual differences, why people are different or similar in all these different domains. And so that'll be kind of my bias. You'll see that probably come through in the various things that I'm talking about. But one of these core personality characteristics is called openness to experience. And several of our speakers have talked about that. I don't know if you remember, but be more open, be more willing to try out new ideas, and try not to be so categorized or self-categorized, or however you want to think about that. So there is that, and then I consider physical wellness to be foundational for the good life, for mental health, obviously for physical health, for everything. And so throughout my career here, I've always had that as a kind of foundation. I make sure that I find time to try to eat well. I don't always do that, but to actually work out and take advantage of the rec center, whatever opportunities that you have. So that was something that we heard from a couple of speakers, right? And we heard from Dr. Dunlap, who talked about go outside. Let's go outside. And I would second that you might remember that our history as a species was that we tended to spend much time outside. Yet, what are we doing now? Here we are, sitting here, like, this is unnatural, right? That's what he was talking about. So, here's some other things we heard this semester. I don't know if anybody actually mentioned doom scrolling, but I kind of like that concept. I don't know if you've caught yourself doing that. Have you done that lately? Have you done that like every single day? Is that something you can't stop doing? Hopefully you can control that, but a couple of our speakers talked about that, kind of taking a step back from exposing ourselves to just the news cycle, right? And much of that, in my opinion, is politics and gamesmanship, or whatever you want to call that, which for me is a lot of distraction. I've actually experimented on myself. As a psychologist, we're allowed to do that. And I'm not going to expose myself to any of my typical news sources for like a week. What happens? Did I miss anything? No, I didn't miss anything. Like the main stories or whatever are going to filter down. I'm going to see those walking into a restaurant. It's up on the TV screen or whatever that they're constantly showing, right? So you can actually do this. You don't have to be constantly, right, caught up. I would add, and I talk to my students about this often for managing a thesis or whatever it is, planning out for your career, what have you, the importance of small steps and the avoidance of all or none thinking. All or none thinking is like, I either do it fully or I can't do it, right? You can do like a little bit of it. Right, and then slowly ease your way into whatever it is that we're talking about. Okay? The batteries are dying. Some of the speakers talked about purpose. What is your purpose in life, or just overall purpose? And this concept that philosophers like to talk about of intentionality, free will. I think Dr. Oliver was talking about that a fair bit. Right? So we heard about that. Hopefully you've been thinking about that. What is my purpose? Oops, I missed the last one, which was several speakers gave some really interesting quotes. We heard stories and parables that are really important as well. And that's what I noticed as I was putting this talk together was there are certain things that whoever I am, like, are meaningful to me. And so that's what I'm going to try to share with you. And hopefully you'll find a few of them. Some of these things you may well disagree with, actually. And that's okay. All right, if we have time, we can talk about that. Or if you want me to elaborate on thinking with regard to these things. Okay? Let me see if there's anything else we heard this semester. So it's a little bit of a different summary from Dr. Evans' summary. Okay, oh, there's more. Try not to settle. It's a concept that I've used frequently for myself and for my students and colleagues and family and so on, which I think is our human nature to settle. I like to be comfortable. And my routine currently is pretty good, and so I'm just going to stay in this bounded area of settlement, if you will. I think actively working against that can be positive. Isn't necessarily always. We heard about faithful friends and unlikely friends. I really like that idea of going outside of your comfort zone, of people who are your friends or can provide significant information to you. That's what I'm going to get to here in about a few minutes, the role of other people. Okay, 2 more things. Identify your springs of delight. Dr. Oliver talked about that. And then I like that quote, it is solved by walking. It's easy to remember. Whenever you're in a stressful situation, if you can recall that, you don't need the Latin version of it, you can use the English version. It is solved by walking. I don't want to talk about it, I'm going to go for a walk. Right? I just like getting out. What does it do? It gets you outside if you go out for a walk. Right? And somebody who likes to walk, myself, so I have a step counter. My phone tells me how many steps I walk each day. Yours does too, right? In case you never checked that. But I have a goal of, it varies, 5,000 to 6,000 steps per day. So I walk a lot on campus. I don't know that I'm solving anything, but I'm getting my steps in. So I really like that idea. It's all about walking. All right, so I think this is what we heard this semester, really, really condensed. So here's the conclusion that I have drawn from all this stuff we're hearing. So there are so many things that we can or should do to increase our chances of finding. Did you get that impression this semester? Is it like TMI in some ways? Is it like, I gotta do that now? Then I gotta go outside and start walking? Come on. That's a real problem, I think. It's a problem for all of us. We have to figure out some kind of balance with respect to that. Because it can be so overwhelming. I think listening to all of these really great talks with really good ideas, and that's a great quote, and I'm sitting there thinking, this is like overwhelming. How am I going to implement this in my own life? And I'm here to tell you that I don't really have an answer to that. Other than to show you some of the ways that I've traversed that dilemma, if you will. Okay? Oh, so this was from one of my psychology professors, 1979, probably before you were born. Is that true? Most,
Absolutely.
except for the fringes of the room, maybe. But we were taking like a positive psychology class. He was teaching this in 1979, and what he frequently would say in that class as we're talking about how do you find the good life, and how are we supposed to do this, and he would, and this is my really bad accent imitation of him, don't be afraid. Something like that. I can still hear him saying that. And various points that comes up for me. Not that I'm really afraid of much these days, because when you get older, I think you tend to be less afraid of stuff. But he was talking about don't be afraid of living fully. Don't be afraid. So, who am I to be talking about this stuff? Here's a quote from this book that came out by a psychologist named Dan Gilbert, 2007. And the basic premise was happiness is something that you kind of stumble into. It's not something you can be like really strategic about. And I really like this quote. And I'll just let you read it. I won't read it for you because I understand that you all can read. Okay? The future is fundamentally different than it appears through the perspectoscope. Is just a thing he made up. It's like the way that we think is what's going to actually happen in the future. There's so much stuff that's kind of random. And if you think too hard about it, your brain might explode. That's me, that's not what he said, but that's like, it's kind of like what he's talking about, okay? So here's one of the quotes I like a lot, and this is attributed to Sigmund Freud, and these are two cats that currently have us in our house. They're brothers. I don't know if you can tell, but they are brothers, Tara and Sky. This is attributed to Freud, but it's apocryphal, I think. He was more of a dog person, so he probably would never have said this, but it's out there, you can easily find it. But I happen to agree with this. We're a cat family, have been for 20-some years or whatever, and I think the same is also true for dogs, and potentially other animals. Goldfish? Possibly. Okay, so some more about me. I come from a family history that has never, as far as I know, never really been formally diagnosed with like OCD. But if you look at like my uncles and my dad and some of my siblings, I have 9 brothers and sisters, so I have a lot of data to go on. And there's a lot of these tendencies, which I have too. We think of it as like how we're wired. And I realize that I've taken advantage of that over the years. The tendencies. Fortunately, for most of us, it's not so extreme that it becomes debilitating. But I will advise my students that if you have some tendencies like this, especially those students that want to go to graduate school, then it's a good thing to have. Because attention to detail and this kind of thing can really help you out down the road. So I have some of that. On the other hand, so I'm talking like a personality psychologist here, right? There's another core trait that is called neuroticism, which is an unfortunate kind of clinical term. It's got negative connotations to it. But it's really like negative emotional reactivity. And I've been fortunate, since as long as I can remember, to be low in that. And so that's been a good combination for me, as opposed to some of my siblings who are high in this. And so this combined with obsessive compulsive tendencies can lead to some issues, which some of my siblings have had. Okay? So I'm just giving this as an example of what are your characteristics and what particular strengths and weaknesses potentially, and then how do you manage those? How do you juggle those as you're trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do with your life? So this is just like a random thought that came to me. I don't know if it's going to fit in at all to what I'm talking about right now, but it'll give you a little more insight into me. When I was in maybe 3rd grade, so I've been playing basketball since I was like 8 years old, and I still play over at the rec center. I try to play a couple times a week. In 3rd grade, we were having a practice, and the coach stopped the practice and said, "You all don't know how to shoot layups. You know who knows how to shoot layups? Tommy. Tommy, show him how to shoot a layup." So guess what happened? Anybody want to guess?
You messed up. Did you miss?
He's like, "Oh no, is he going to kick me off the team?" And the coach was great. He said, he laughed. I think some of the other players laughed too, like, we don't want to imitate him. He said, "Tommy, do it again." The next time I did it, he was sure. Made the layup. "That's how you shoot a layup," he said. That stuck with me. It's weird, huh? You have stuff like this yourself, okay? You're going to find, as you go through life, certain things like this stick with you for some reason, right? Whether you want them to or not, right? So that's just that random example. One of the things that we talk frequently about in our psychology classes is the value of predicting, right? We are a species that likes to predict in any domain. We like to control things, and we like to categorize. In fact, I would argue it's almost impossible not to categorize, despite our efforts not to. When I first meet somebody, I'd rather not categorize at all. I would like to be completely a blank slate. I think that's virtually impossible to do. So if you can recognize the limits of your efforts to control things or to predict things and categorizing things, at least step back a little bit, I think that could be insightful for you. So here's again an example of me being biased with my disciplinary background. Okay. I'm up front, that's my bias as a psychologist. So I'm going to talk more psychological stuff. Some more stuff about me. I have found over the years that I haven't looked at like, that's a terrible thing that's happened. It's a trauma or it's an obstacle. I have shifted, and part of that was through my coursework and through significant mentors over the years. So to look at things as more challenges and opportunities. So little shifts like that make a big difference potentially. Here's a quote from a Greek philosopher that's used by therapists, some therapists who try to get their clients to think along these same ways. It's how we think about things that's really potentially the problem or the good thing. It's not what actually happens to us. So, this is really hard to do, but if you can suspend judgment, okay, so would you agree, how many of you would describe yourself as being occasionally or potentially frequently judgmental? How many of you are in denial and saying that you're not like So that it's again, I think a natural tendency. It's back to that like predicting and controlling and understanding what's going around in our environment and so on. If you can suspend that long enough to see what's actually going on in the situation, I think that's really good advice that I've tried to practice over the years. And then I think this is probably something to do with like those OCD tendencies or something for me. But I've noticed over the years that looking at patterns and consistencies in all kinds of domains, in myself and other people, in the physical environment, that has been very useful, very valuable. See if you can detect these things. Notice that you're doing it yourself if you are doing that. Because that gives you some insight, that gives you the ability to listen to other people, for one thing, and to communicate more effectively with others, and so on. Some more stuff I'll talk about here in a second. Okay, so here's where I get to the role of other people, which has come out repeatedly in talks that we've heard this semester. In psychology, there's a long-standing body of research that shows in terms of wellness and happiness, well-being, and the good life, relationships are more important than achievements. Who am I to be talking about that? Dr. Evans listed a bunch of achievements of me. It's like, downplay those. It's really, please, Mary, downplay those. It's the relationships that I've been able to develop that have allowed me to reach those achievements. And there's various theories and reasons on why relationships work more effectively for our happiness than do achievements. But we won't get into that. That's a different topic or lecture. Some of you might know Ed Wong, who is a science journalist. This is something that just came out a few weeks ago that I just came across. He was describing his venture into birding. So he's like a decorated, I think he's won the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction writing. But he started a bird, and one of the things he realized was that this ceaseless production, nose to the grindstone kind of thing, is really not that important. One of the realizations that he's come to. So, I don't know, this might be a 1970s term or something, I don't know. Have you ever heard this term, empath? Is it still around? Flower children and stuff like that. Anyway, I think personality-wise, I have those characteristics, and I have those characteristics. And if you think utilitarian-wise, I've been able to utilize those characteristics or this characteristic to my benefit. That's like a cold scientific way of looking at it, perhaps. But I've always, especially as a kid, I was always attracted to people that were bullied or that were marginalized in some way or another. And it's like, that's not fair, or why is that? So I would sometimes even be friends with them. Not that I didn't sometimes bully others. I grew up with 9 brothers and sisters. We had a lot of what's called sibling rivalry. Okay? But there's that kind of sensitivity that is really serving well. If you have something like that, you can develop this. This is an example of some other things I'll talk about as developed skills. They're things that come with practice. They're practice skills, including empathy. When is the last time that you really listened to what somebody was telling you? Like in a one-on-one conversation. Really listen to them. As opposed to like, what were you saying? I'm sorry, what? Just a second. Oh, really? This is something that I try to do to greater or lesser degree of success, is to listen to what other people are saying and being willing to listen to them. It seems simple, but think about the last time that you actually did that. This is a little controversial. Telling people what you think of them. What I really mean by this is positive things that you think of them. I don't like to, unless they're like really close, significant other, my wife of 41 years sitting over here, then we're able to tell us what we think of each other that we're not happy with. Right? But for my colleagues and students, when I see something that impresses me, I've increasingly, especially over the years, I've told them that. It's like, that's really good. Have you thought about, using that? You have a skill in this area. Did you know that? And I'm not being manipulative, I don't think. I'm trying to be honest with folks. And that's what I'm suggesting here by telling people what you think of them. Parenthesis, positive stuff. Negative also. But some of you may have seen this quote before, heard this quote before. Why would I care what a stranger thinks? Why should I care? That's something I'll ask people sometimes. Because you're basically, permit me to say this, but you're basically letting them get into your head, and you're becoming a prisoner of them by worrying about them. And it's not even strangers, right? It's also significant others, but it's probably a good idea that you do care about the approval of your significant others. I think that's a good idea. Oh, okay, so this is a random thing here. Some of you eat Dove chocolates. Do you know the little sayings inside those? So that is one of my vices. Actually, I consider it a virtue of eating dark chocolates. And these are 2 of my favorites that just like, I don't know if you can read, be with people who make you laugh. It's like, that's a good one. And then hands are meant to be held. And I think that applies to our families, our friends, not so much in like an academic context, but your significant others, right? And other contexts where that is true. So just kind of like our random thing. I had my Dove chocolates for lunch today, but these weren't part of that. So, other people in the self, you might be familiar with this quote from Pope Francis. You might know the context of that, which has now become a little more sketchy in terms of that statement. But still, it's like that is something that I have always felt myself. And it goes back to being empathetic. It's like, why are we making fun of this person that lacks social skills or whatever? It's like, what am I getting out of that? You've probably seen this Maya Angelou. That's also frequently out there. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Okay. And then there's this quote. This is one that I would agree with personally, because I've been like this as well. And my mother would have told you this. She thought I should have gone into law or something, because I was always arguing with her or asking for reasons or whatever. There's this measure of concept called psychological reactance, and it means basically this. When somebody tries to get you to do something, you feel like your control is being taken away, and so you feel like doing the opposite of that. Have you ever felt this way? We have a very high level of psychological reactance in this class. I don't know what that means. It may have something to do with being an honor student. But I put this up because it's a nice parallel to my quote. But also, it's something I've had to work against. So I've had to figure out when somebody tells me to do something as opposed to asking me to do something. I have this urge you can't tell me what to do. I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to do the opposite of that. Being like a little kid almost, right? I've learned to temper that and take some time, and then eventually I'll come around to, especially if they're making me do it, or I have to do it in order to keep my job or something like that, right? There are reasons where you would still do it even if you react like that. Seen that bumper sticker on cars? I always liked this. I would not put it on my car because I try to just keep my car uncluttered and don't want to make political statements and stuff, but I've been a person like this too. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Not just because it's me and I'm being defensive or something. I think you can also, you should, and that's part of a college education, right? Part of being in the honors college is to question sources of authority. How is this all going to fit together into the good life? I don't know, but by the time we get to the end, hopefully you'll realize something. Okay? So here's the points about possible wisdom, and these are some things that you may or may not agree with as we go through them. One is this, and this I should have fixed this because sometimes failure is bad, right? There are situations where if I fail to protect my loved ones and they get injured or something, that's bad. Don't do that, right? I'm really referring more to interpersonal failures, academic failures, failures that inform my sense of identity, my sense of who I am. And that happens more often than we'd like, most likely. That things don't go your way, or that's not bad. Do you remember, how many of you have ever ridden a bicycle? Do you remember learning how to ride a bike? Were you able to master it the first time you tried? Did you fail repeatedly at trying to ride a bike, skin your knees, stuff like that, your elbows? They weren't even having you wear a helmet back in those days. Okay? This is true in many domains. And in fact, there's a new area of research. There's lots of interest in this idea that failure actually can be often good for us. In fact, it's typically the way that we learn many things. Okay, so there's that. Avoid perfectionistic tendencies. So here's a quote from, some of you know Brene Brown. She's written a lot about perfectionism. Do we have any perfectionists in the room? Anybody willing to admit this? Who aren't in denial again? It's like, perfectionism, for me, it comes along with that sort of like that OCD tendency type stuff, right? But you see what she's saying is, it's an unattainable goal. And I just realized that I misspelled perfectionistic. Did anybody notice that? Until I called your attention to it? Dang! I did it on purpose, thinking that I wonder if anybody noticed that, because if you noticed it, you're probably having kind of perfectionistic tendencies. When I see somebody present, I'm reading the text and looking for spelling and grammar errors. What the? Listen to what they're saying instead. Which hopefully that's what you're doing while you missed the fact that I misspelled it. This is a Buddhist monk quote that I like to give to my students. We talk about it, we talk about Buddhism as kind of a psychology or philosophy in some of our psych classes. I've always liked this, just because it's like really to the point. And he says, please enjoy your only life. Now, it's for me to come up to somebody and say that, why are you so upset? Why don't you just enjoy your only life? No, I don't think I'm going to do that. So it's in more of this kind of context where I would say something like this. This is like, to me, it's like a good quote that does apply to our finding the good life. Here's some more points. One of the things about being a professor is, if any of you are thinking about going into that field, academia, it's like you get to be a perpetual student. You don't have to be in academia to be like that. You can be a perpetual student wherever and whenever you are. Why is it that we have these cutoff points? You graduate, what happens when you graduate? You know what happens when you graduate? You stop learning. That's the assumption. Don't let that happen. See, there's no reason for that. It's like artificial, isn't it? So, you know how little kids are? You ever been around little kids? You once were a little kid. You remember asking why about everything? Why is the sky blue? I think it has something to do with the way the light what's refract mean? It's like, I don't know. Kids do this naturally. They're like natural scientists, actually. Keep asking why. Not to the point where you're a devil's advocate, necessarily, because then it's just like asking why for the heck of it. If you've ever been around a devil's advocate, they're like, you're just trying to argue. But I'm not saying that. I'm saying, be like a little kid if you can. They experience joy. They laugh a lot. They take naps. I hesitated to put this slide up, or to include this as part of this slide, but I have learned from things that in retrospect I would consider stupid, dumb, selfish, and worse. It's like, why did I do that? What am I going to do about it? Right? If you haven't ever had any of these things, you will in the future. Right? There's no escaping from that. The issue, the pivot point is, how are you going to learn from that? Are you going to learn from that? Here's a few more points. Some of our speakers have talked about finding and making meaning. I mentioned this earlier. The values of empathy, gratitude, forgiveness, those aren't things you're born with. I would argue that there's no evidence, very little evidence that we're born with these. There are things that come with practice. So it's actually a good idea to practice these things and see what happens. Quote from William James. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Oliver had a bunch of William James quotes, remember? And I was just waiting for him to put this one up, saying, dang, that's going to take away from my talk. Don't put that quote up. He didn't. So here it is. The art of being wise is knowing what to overlook. Some other points of wisdom. What do you want to be when you grow up? That's a quote that you've heard before, haven't you? From like countless others. Your parents probably, and your teachers. I still use this with my graduate students. We're talking about something like what are their career plans, and I'll ask them, what do you want to be? And they laugh, and it's like, I'm serious. Like, what do you want to be? I actually ask this of my colleagues as well, occasionally. We're kind of joking about it, right? But it's this progression. Right? It's not the you've heard this, right? It's not the destination, is it? It's the what? It's the journey, isn't it? I don't have that as a quote, but, right? Because it goes without saying, you know the derivation of career? You're all thinking about a career now, are you? What's the derivation of that? It refers to, from the Latin, like a chariot, or your car today, right? It also refers to movement, like a course or passage. Right? I like that. It's not something they typically talk about in careers courses. Where does the word career come from? It actually refers to your direction. And what is the direction that you're going? What is the movement that you have? Have you heard this one? If you haven't, here's the first time you've heard it. Life is short. I'm here to tell you, life is short. Ask your parents, ask your grandparents, ask anybody. Countless people have said that. I try to keep that in mind. I don't wake up every morning and think that, but I think it. Especially when I'm sitting in traffic or somebody's like, the light has changed and they're just sitting there. Why are you making me sit here? Life is short. Stop stealing time from me. That's just my own pet peeve. Don't worry about that. I'm working on that currently. A few more. So, personal stories, redemption narratives, and finding your niche. Okay? So this is what ties back to personality, what I was talking about with my own personality. What I think has happened almost by stumbling is that I found a career, a job, an environment, an institution that allowed me to have a good match between my personal characteristics and what the environment is expecting of me. I think that's a really good moral or theme or something to keep in mind for yourself. The personal stories is a theory in psychology that Dr. Marshall was talking about this a little bit, narrative psychology. Do you remember that? He was talking about like therapy and stuff. The personal stories are like when bad things happen to you, what do you make of that? How does it inform who you are, your sense of self or identity? And there's a distinction made between contamination stories, really bad things that have happened to you, and redemption stories. Redemption stories are like, this is a really bad thing that happened to me, but I'm a better person now because of it. So some therapists actually try to get people to think more of what are positives of this. An extreme example of this would be someone who was in a car accident and became a quadriplegic. Occasionally I'll read about them or see them in the news, and they'll say things like, I've seen this frequently actually, it's like, I wouldn't change a thing. After the accident, I became a better person. It's like, are you sure? I'm not going to say that to them, but what do they mean? They mean, right, this told me something about myself, and I've learned and I've developed that. So that's an extreme example, right? But it's an example of going from what many would consider a horrible contamination event to a redemptive sequence or story. So, the importance of balance and moderation. I don't know if my arrows showed up here much, but this is actually something that's closely related to like a Buddhist concept of like the middle way. And that again came out frequently, I think, in the presentations that we had. And then, I think that's where I am. Yes. That's all I got.